Hello and welcome to another video from the only channel that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse but actually enjoy it. And today's video is going to be called The Reason for the Season. Now, I've produced videos in the past about the origins of Christmas, the origins of Easter, as well as the origins of many other so-called Christian holidays, and today is not going to really be a rehash of any of that information. Since I've started the Bible Code video series and I'm doing these unscripted, I have decided to go ahead and relate to you why the solar system is what the holidays are actually about. We're going to look at that right now. Now, a lot of people see this and they say, well, they're taking Christ out of Christmas because this is Xmas, taking Christ out of Christmas. But the reality is that when they came up with Christmas, they were actually taking the X out of Xmas because Xmas is a lot older holiday than Christmas, and it involves constellation crux that we talked about in the last video. And I know currently that may not make sense, and we certainly are not going to have enough time to talk about that today, but the reality is that Christmas got its start as Cruxmas. We've already spoken about the relationship between the ecliptic and the equator, but we're going to go ahead and talk about it again. Now, this is the sun, this is the earth, and this line right here is called the ecliptic. And the reason it's called the ecliptic is because this is the line which passes through the sun, which also passes through the orbits of all of the planets. Now, some of the planets are not exactly on the ecliptic. They may be a little bit above it or a little bit below it, but in general, there's an area that passes through the sun within which all of the planets revolve. So all of the planets are somewhere within the ecliptic, and that is where we get our astrological symbols. Now, we're going to get a little bit more into detail about why astrology only recognizes the ecliptic, but right now we're going to explain the relationship between the Earth and the Moon and the ecliptic. Now, our Earth is at an angle, which means that our equator is at an angle. And because of that, we experience summer in the northern hemisphere when the northern hemisphere is facing the sun. When the Earth circles halfway around the sun, it's exactly the opposite. Because at that point, we are facing away from the sun, which means it's going to be a little bit colder for us, so the northern hemisphere will experience winter. But there's something else that's even more important that's going on during that time, and it is spoken of in the Bible. And we're going to do a little bit more detailed look at this with some pictures, because when I just explain it with words, it's kind of difficult to get the idea of exactly what's going on. In the ancient past, as is today, the moon is pretty much over the equator. So that's where the moon goes around the Earth. It goes around at the equator. So as it's circling the Earth, sometimes it's here, sometimes it's over here, sometimes it's over on this side, sometimes it's down here. So in the summer and the winter, if we're looking at the moon, we're actually going to be looking away from the ecliptic. Because remember, the ecliptic goes straight. The moon is at an angle. It's the same angle as the Earth because it's circling around the equator. Now, this is going to be important. In the ancient past, we are told that God created the heavens and the earth. And then we're later told that He created the great seas. He created the sea, or the sea that's on the earth, but He also, below the expanse, in fact. The way most Bibles say that He created the seas below the expanse, but He also created the seas above the expanse. And that word expanse simply means the empty space. It's a space that's not filled by any solid. So even though this is all going to be space, even our atmosphere in the Bible is considered as space, although there are other Hebrew and Greek words to describe the area beneath our atmosphere, or within our atmosphere, that are a little bit different than the area outside of our atmosphere. But in any case, this right here is the earth. Just so you can see, this is the earth in green. And this is the sea in blue. Kind of looks like an eyeball, and that is in fact mentioned in the Bible. So this area around here would be water, and although I do not participate in the religion of science, they say that the area above our atmosphere is very, very, very cold. So cold that there's no doubt that anything up there that was a liquid, water in a liquid state, would quickly turn to water in a solid state. So this here would be a wall of ice. And in fact, in the book of Revelation, it is spoken of where, again, just as it's spoken of in the book of Genesis, only this time it is called the Sea of Glass. Now that's in our English Bible. Some say the Sea of Crystal, but in the original Greek language, what it actually says there is the hard, transparent sea. And of course, all of the seas on the earth, which were created at the same time that this sea was created, are made of water, so there is no reason to believe that this Sea of Crystal would be made out of glass or crystal. That sea, that hard, transparent sea, would be a sea of frozen water. Now, in our day, we have what are called eclipses, lunar eclipses and solar eclipses, and I'll show you the difference between the two. Here's the sun, and here's the earth. When the moon is over here in perfect alignment, which only happens about maybe once a year in perfect alignment, if then. I don't know that we ever have perfectly aligned eclipses anymore. But in the ancient past, every year at spring, there would be a perfect alignment of the sun and the earth and the moon, with the moon on the far side of the earth causing an eclipse. That means the shadow of the earth would fall on the moon. And in fact, in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, we're told about 7 bowls of God's wrath, 7 trumpet blasts, and the removing of 7 seals. So what you would see during an eclipse, because they don't last forever, they're a passing phenomenon, but we have a moon that is full, and then we have a moon where the shadow of the earth is slowly starting to come across it. Then we would have a moon with the shadow directly on it. And then we have a moon with the shadow leaving it. And so in the Bible, these are the 7 cycles that we're going to experience when the last days begin. The last days is spoken of as a period of 1,260 days. The same time period is spoken of as times and half a year. or times and times and half a time, but the word that we translate as times actually means year. So it's a year. And years. And half a year. And I'm not exactly sure of how it works, but apparently this word for years, plural, only means 2 years. So we got 1 plus 2, which is 3.5. And as I've said many times before, in the ancient past, every culture around the earth believed that the earth had a 360-day year. That being the case, then the earth must have had a 360-day year. 3.5 years of 360-day years equals 1,260 days. And if that's not enough confirmation for you, there are quite a few scriptures which are prophetically speaking of the last days and call it 42 months. In a 360-day year, months would be 30 days long. 42 months times 30 days equals 1,260 days. So during this 1,260 days, we are going to experience 7 seals being opened, 7 bowls being poured out, and 7 trumpet blasts. Now, if this does not look to you like a seal or a trumpet blast or a bowl, just think of this. If you've got a bowl and it's being poured out onto the earth, and that bowl was the moon, then you're going to see something that looks like this. As the bowl is starting to turn, you can start to see inside of the bowl. Once the bowl is facing directly over you, dumping, you'll see this. And then once again, the bowl is being turned back to a full moon. Same thing with the trumpet blast. When a man would take a trumpet, not actually a brass trumpet, but a trumpet made from a ram's horn, as he would blow, you would be able to look into the bowl or the horn of that trumpet and you would see something like this. Same thing with removing of seals. On a scroll, oftentimes they would seal a scroll with wax seals that were not to be opened until the scroll arrived at its destination to the person it was meant for. And you would see those seals being removed, just like this imagery here. Churches, of course, have not got a clue about any of this. Why is that important? Because outside of the Bible, we have this. Now, everybody pretty much knows that that is the peak, the capstone of the pyramid, which is not there anymore. We're talking about the Great Pyramid of Giza, but in the Bible there are scriptures about God throwing down a stone from the mountain of Yahweh, or the mountain of the Elohim, or the mountain of God. And ever since the flood, historians who have gone out to Egypt have recorded that the Great Pyramid is missing its capstone. So those scriptures are about that. Now, whether or not this imagery was actually on the capstone, we don't know. But on the back of the dollar bill, it's there. And there are hundreds of these things all over the world from ancient times to pyramids with eyeballs on them. Makes absolutely no sense. And this is called the all-seeing eye. But if we remember that this is an Egyptian symbology, then we can look at other Egyptian symbols that are also have eyeballs. And this is called the Eye of Ra, the Eye of Horus. People say that the left eye is one and the right eye is the other, but that is, this is what came before this, but they're both the same thing. I'm going to show you what this is, and if you've been watching my videos for a while, you probably already know. We'll just come over here and do it. That is the serpent god, also known as Osiris, also known as the Green One. It is the same serpent that's spoken of in the book of Genesis as well as the book of Revelation. The original serpent, Satan, the devil. That is a representation of Eve. That is representation of Adam. And if you notice where the snake is penetrating Eve, there is what's called a zygote. That is a fertilized egg. The serpent god, the Green One, a human female, and a human man. The man was meant for the woman, but the woman entered into a covenant with the serpent god in order to get impregnated so that she could give birth to this zygote, this demigod. Eventually it would become Hercules. Started off as Horus in the Egyptian Empire. So we're going to take a closer look at exactly how all of this happens. Now, remember we said that as the Earth goes around the Sun, the angle of the Earth relative to the universe never changes, but the angle relative to the Sun does. So we've got the Sun here, and over here we've got the Earth, and over here we've got the Moon. Now, the moon god is oftentimes associated with Eve, or Isis, or Aishishish, and is always the mother goddess, the mother of all on the earth. Now, during an eclipse, remember the moon would look like this. Once again, this imagery that everybody on the Eastern Hemisphere would have seen would have reminded them of that eye, that all-seeing eye in the pyramid and the eye of Ra, that impregnated zygote. Now this would only happen at the equinox. We have 2 equinoxes a year, the spring equinox and the fall equinox. However, our Earth has 2 hemispheres. And that's the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. But remember this also, that the lunar eclipse would only last for a short time, over the course of about half of a night. People that were on this side of the earth would experience daylight. They would not see the equinox. Now we get 2 equinoxes a year, or they wouldn't see the eclipse. We get 2 equinoxes a year, but we only get one that would do this. Because 180 days later, that wouldn't be the eastern hemisphere facing into the nighttime sky, it would be the western hemisphere facing into the nighttime sky. So that nighttime sky, which would happen in the spring in the east, would happen in the fall in the west. So that's why, even though (1,260 days) would only equal 3.5 years. You could double that 3.5 years because you would have twice as many equinoxes. So you get 7 seals, 7 bulls, 7 trumpet blasts out of 3.5 years. Now the way that would look is like this. These are the cycles. Each one of these is 6 months for a total of 3.5 years. So if we got 1,260 days, 3.5 years, we get 7 trumpet blast, 7 bowls of God's wrath, the removing of 7 seals, then if we count these up, what are we going to get? It's 8. So why is it 8? Now, the only reason I'm answering this because every time I talk about this, somebody gets confused. But remember, irregardless of what happens on this day, which may or may not be a perfect eclipse, very likely not, that doesn't count. But that's not part of the 1,260 days. I suspect that what we're going to see at the very beginning is 2 blood moons in a row. And so now we got to explain what a blood moon is. Once again, there's our sun. Here's the earth. And here's the moon. So what happens if this is not a perfect alignment? And remember, this is not drawn to proportion. We're talking about thousands of miles of distance between these objects, these celestial objects. We get a shadow that's slightly off. It's not going to hit here. It's going to hit right about there. So what is a blood moon? Well, around our Earth, we have an atmosphere. And the atmosphere we have is polluted. And not necessarily just by man-made pollutants, but just gases that naturally occur in the air, mixed in with all the stuff we add to it. And you get a shadow coming from our atmosphere, and depending on whether the moon is above or below, that's where the shadows are going to come. Because in our current society, the way things work is you'll get a blood moon in the fall and a blood moon in the spring if things line up right, but one of those is caused by the sun coming through the atmosphere at the northern hemisphere, and the other might be from the atmosphere, the southern hemisphere. And it's actually a mixture of all of it. So that's what a blood moon is. However, that's not the way it would have happened in the ancient past. And why is that? Because this is not a polluted atmosphere. Remember, this is a globe of ice, very similar to glass, hard, transparent sea. The hard, transparent sea. And I don't know if you've ever had any experience with prisms. But I think most of us have seen a rainbow, and probably a lot of us have seen how a prism works. It's just a little piece of cut glass. Light goes through, and the light gets separated into its individual colors. So you've got a prism, and light's coming through over here. But when it comes out, it's broken down into its colors. Well, that's the way a rainbow works. A rainbow doesn't pass, the light from the sun does not pass through a prism to create a rainbow. It passes through water droplets, which are this shape. So, in the ancient world, once every 6 months, once every year on the eastern hemisphere, once every year on the western hemisphere, you're going to have the moon sitting out here with a black dot on it. That's the zygote. That is the day of conception to the ancient peoples of the ancient past who worship Satan. This was a memorial to the day that Satan was able to impregnate Aishish, Osiris and Isis, the gods impregnated the human females. But of course, the next day, the shadow of the earth will just barely miss. It'll be up here, or it'll be down here, be to the side. Actually, where it's going to be is to the side, depending on whatever the rotation is, and that's not important for what we're talking about right now. But if it's out of alignment just a little bit, say the moon's just off one way or the other, the shadow may be out in space somewhere, but The light passing through this sea of glass will land on the moon, making it red. So it would be red immediately, right just before an eclipse it would be red. Just after an eclipse it would be red. And this also would be part of the memorializing the sexual act between the demons and human females. I hope you're able to understand this. I'm trying to make it as simple as I can. So what happens 30 days later? Well, every night you'll see that red slowly moving off of the moon and being replaced by some other color, and we don't know what that color is. We do know that it's going to be red immediately after the eclipse. And the reason for that is because in the Bible it speaks of the days when these trumpet blasts are taking place. The last days, the 1,260-day period, is ending. And what the Bible calls a day when the sun will turn as black as sackcloth, while the moon turns red as blood. So what are we talking about here once again? Here's the sun, there's the earth, and here's the moon. So if that's the sun, here's the earth, here's the moon, what are we going to experience? We're going to experience a lunar eclipse or a blood moon, because when this is in alignment in the spring, then you're going to get a red moon. When it's in alignment in the fall, you'll get a red moon, but only on the eastern hemisphere, or the western hemisphere. Remember, the people that lived in the east are not going to experience the same thing as people in the west. And that's true for the summer and the winter as well. So, that's true of everything that's in the calendar. So the northern hemisphere will experience winter when the southern hemisphere is experiencing summer, and vice versa. The eastern hemisphere and western hemispheres will experience the spring equinox and fall equinox backwards from one another as well, because of the difference between the northern and southern hemisphere and because of the position of the earth during the spring and the fall. Okay, that was getting way too complicated for a two-dimensional whiteboard, so I went ahead and made a little teaching aid so we can go over this again. Now let's imagine that this is how our Earth is divided, and this is the equator. So this will be the northern hemisphere. This is where most of us live. Down below the equator is called the southern hemisphere. If this is the sun, this whiteboard, and this is the equator, what's occurring is that our northern hemisphere is facing away from the sun, meaning we're experiencing winter, but down here where the south is, southern hemisphere, it's a little closer to the sun. So they're going to experience summer. Now, as the earth comes around the sun, suddenly everything is reversed, because now the northern hemisphere is facing the sun, where it is warm. The southern hemisphere is facing away from the sun. So the southern hemisphere experiences exactly the opposite seasons that the northern hemisphere experiences, and this is actually recorded in the Bible. The Jews were commanded to keep two calendars exactly 6 months apart, and according to the Jewish faith, the reason for that was because there was a secular calendar and a religious calendar, but that is not written in the Bible anywhere. That's something that modern day man speculates about. The reality is God was acknowledging in the Bible that He was aware that the earth had a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere. That's the only reason that's there. Now we're going to change things around a bit and explain the reason that people on one side of the earth will experience an eclipse while people on the other side of the earth do not. This once again is our equator. And this is the northern hemisphere, this is the southern hemisphere, and since the Bible was written to the people who lived in the Middle East, this is the Middle East. This is, just imagine this to be the Promised Land. So here we are. Promised Land is on that side. When the earth comes around to here, Promised Land is on that side. Now, we're not going to experience an eclipse in the summer or the winter. We're only going to experience an eclipse in the spring. So if we're looking at this at the angle of the Earth and how it never changes relative to the universe, but it does change relative to the sun, then we'll see that when the Earth is here, the top is facing towards the sun. When the Earth is here, the bottom is facing towards the sun. But when the Earth is out here, the bottom of the Earth, the southern hemisphere, is facing out into space. The top of the Earth is facing out into space because it is the equator itself that is facing the sun. Now we're going to just imagine what the spring equinox looks like relative to the sun, because that's what's going to cause our eclipses, and I can draw that out. Remember, this is going to be at equinox, when the Earth is straight up and down relative to the sun, and the Middle East is right here. That's let's say this is Israel, right up here. So if the moon is directly in alignment with the equator, people in Israel are going to be able to witness the eclipse. But as the Earth is spinning, of course, everybody is experiencing day and night, including Israel. Well, on the other side of the sun, 180 days later, when it's summertime, and Israel once again finds itself the same side of the Earth relative to the universe, but the opposite side of the sun relative to the sun, and the moon's over here, the moon is going to have an eclipse while Israel, or the Middle East, or the eastern side of the planet, is facing away from the eclipse itself. Of course, the next day, Israel will once again be aligned with the moon, but the eclipse will already be over. On that day, all that will be left is what we currently call a blood moon, but what in the ancient past was a red moon. Now we're going to get back to why the Bible says that the Earth would experience, on the last day, on the very last day, a sun as black as sackcloth and a moon as red as blood. Here's the sun. Here's the Earth. Now where would the moon be for such an event? Remember, the sun is black as sackcloth, which means that the moon would have to be over here. That way, the light of the sun would not hit the Earth. So the Earth would be in darkness. But then how could we have a red moon? Because in order for the moon to be red, to experience a blood moon, or even a red as blood moon, the moon would have to be here. The only way to experience a sun as black as sackcloth and a moon as red as blood would be to have two celestial objects close enough to the Earth to cause eclipses. Currently, we do not have that. But in the ancient past, it's not only in the Bible that this is said to happen. All around the world, cultures related events similar to this, which is being spoken of in the Bible, and there's no way that all these different cultures could come up with this stuff unless it actually happened. We must have at one time have had more large celestial objects in close proximity to the Earth so that we could have a lunar eclipse combined with a blood moon. And the light from this planet, the light that's being blocked out from this planet would have to be exactly enough to block out the Earth without blocking the light out from going through the sea of glass. That's just a fact. That's the way it is. Now we're going to talk about Easter a little bit more. And this is going to blow your mind. If at one time, as the Bible says, as every culture on earth says, all of the planets were in close proximity to the earth, we would have experienced something like this. Here's our earth. Here's the moon. On that day, people would celebrate the impregnating of human females by wicked angels. That's what the eclipse would have been, the lunar eclipse. Now, as I said, the next day you wouldn't have that eclipse, but for about, I guess we would have 15 days of red, or there's 30 days of red altogether. So you have 30 days when the moon is red. Don't know if it starts in the middle, it doesn't make any difference. It's not important. But as the moon moves up a little, as the Earth's axis is tilting slightly, you get to a position like this where the red is only falling on the bottom half of the moon. And since I've got a blue marker here, we'll say that there would be blue on the top. But we don't really know. We don't know. Whatever the next color in the rainbow would be, that's what that would be. And remember, what causes that is light passing from the sun through this sea of ice. So it's casting these colors out into space. Much like a prism. In fact, in the Bible, if you remember, immediately after the flood, God made a covenant with Noah to never bring a flood again. And as a sign of his covenant, it says that he placed the rainbow in the clouds. Now, he didn't say he created a rainbow in the clouds. He placed a rainbow in the clouds, as if he took a rainbow that Noah was already familiar with somewhere else and moved it from that position into the clouds, where Noah was used to seeing the rainbow was on the moon. Now, as the Earth's axis shifted and the equator shifted more and more, we find the moon moving more and more. And each move, it changes a different color. So what you're going to have is maybe a red moon here, another color, another color, another color, another color, until we get to something called the solstice. We don't know what colors any of these were, but we know that whenever the Earth got to solstice, the moon would be higher up than before. And remember now, this area here is called the ecliptic. That is the line within which all of the planets line up. And that's important because in the ancient past, whenever a planet would cause a solar eclipse, surrounding the planet would be a corona. So you have a sun here, a moon, or some kind of a celestial object exactly the size of the sun in perspective. So larger planets would be farther from the Earth, so they would look smaller. Smaller planets would be closer to the Earth. Well, that would eventually block the light of the sun. But around the sun, we would see this, which is called a corona. In the ancient past, the word corona was used to describe the crown on the head of a king. If you turn the crown to face you, just like turning that bowl over, you would see something similar to the sun, because that is what a corona is. Corona is the light around the sun that would escape during an eclipse. Eclipses are always associated with the crowning of kings, and we're going to see how this actually pertains to both Easter and Christmas. This is the one that's going to really get you. There's the sun. Here's the earth. Here's the moon. There's the zygote. This is the eclipse. This is on the equinox. The sun rises up, the moon rises up higher and higher out of the ecliptic. Now, in the ancient past, all lunar eclipses and solar eclipses would happen in something called conjunction. So what people would actually see would be other planets coming into line on the day of the eclipse. So if you're sitting on the earth, looking up, you may start the evening with something that looks like this. The moon over here, and Saturn over here. Saturn has rings. But as the night progresses, we're going to see the moon eventually get this dark spot on it, while it was in alignment with Saturn. So we would see Saturn behind the moon when the eclipse started. That would be the actual impregnating of the moon god Sin, which is associated with Eve, with all mother goddesses earthwide. Saturn, which is associated with Satan, would be in perfect alignment. Now we're going to do a little ciphering. So let's say that this took place in the spring. And we actually had 3 months of spring, and I guess we'll just start from the equinox. Let's just say equinox. And then we got whatever the other months are there, 2 months. And then after spring you have summer. Three months of summer. These are months to the very beginning of the month. Spring, summer. Then we have fall. And then we have winter. And each of these is an event. We're talking about the spring equinox, summer equinox, fall equinox, winter equinox. There's exactly 3 months in between each of these. So if we count them up, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is the solstice. Equinox to the solstice. Equinox is when we celebrate Easter. Which comes from our word Ashtoreth, which is a Bible word, and it is the mother goddess, Ashtoreth. It is also the spring festivals of every religion on the planet. I mean, every religion. We call it, over here in the West, we call it Easter. But the Israelites celebrated a Passover during the same time. The Jehovah's Witnesses celebrate the Lord's evening meal at that time. Every culture on earth has got some kind of a spring festival, and they always have a winter festival. And the winter festival is always spoken of as the feast of the undying sun, because remember, that is the absolute longest night of the year. That is the shortest day of the year. Winter is when the sun is farthest away in the northern hemisphere, and the very next day the days begin to lengthen again. So it's the sun going farther and farther away, looking like it's going to die, and then coming back to life. Well, from the equinox to the solstice, from the impregnating of the human females by the demons, by the wicked angels, till the birth of the demons, the Nephilim, gods like Mors and Horus, is 9 months. Xmas is the birth date of the first half-human, half-wicked angel hybrid. Happens 9 months after the impregnation of the zygote. Doesn't end there. In the spring, you have a moon. Looks like that. That's the very first day of the equinox. In line with the planet Saturn. Then, as the months go by, Saturn is still here. But the moon is not really in alignment. But remember, back in the days when the Sea of Glass was still intact, each month the moon would be a different color. Now, something that a lot of people don't know, it's not really important, but I think it's kind of a neat coincidence, is that the moon is not spherical, it's egg-shaped. Now, if you look at it from our perspective on the Earth, it's spherical. And in fact, if you go behind it, it's spherical. If you go above it, it's spherical. If you go alongside of it, it's spherical. But if you took a tape measure and stretched across it, you would find that, in fact, it is not quite spherical. It is actually egg-shaped. Remember, each one of these would be a different color. That's where we get our tradition of Easter eggs, is Sin, the moon goddess, the fertility goddess, would have a different colored egg every month from the month of conception to the solstice, the winter solstice, which would be the month of birth, the hatching of the Ishtar, Ashtoreth, Easter egg. And in fact, if you've ever read the book of Esther, Esther was written while the Israelites, the Jews, were in captivity in Persia. And Esther is the Persian word for Ishtar. The whole story is about Queen Vashti, which is the Persian word for Venus, being replaced by Queen Esther, the Easter egg. If you don't want to survive, don't listen to me.